coming in, but I think given that we have set a certain time, we'll begin on time. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the next SIBC Connects Sustainability for the Next Generation Industry. My name is Arti Davis, and I'm the Senior Vice President at SIBC. I handle sustainability issues, policy, and also focus on transport with our cooperation collaboration with Sweden-India Transport Innovation and Safety Partnership, CITES. To give you some more acronyms and how SIBC is involved in the work on the Sweden-India corridor, we are the Secretariat for the CEO Roundtable between India and Sweden, the India-Sweden Business Leaders Roundtable, or ISBLET. We also lead SciTech, which is our startup collaboration between India and Sweden, Sweden-India Tech Ecosystem, and this is led by Cecilia Oldney, our Senior VP. There are a number of things happening on SIBC's calendar. To find out what is happening and what has happened, please go to our website, www.sibc.se, or reach out to any one of us, Robin Sukia, myself, or Cecilia Oldney, to tell you more about what's happening and how you can get involved. So now I come to today's panel. We are so happy. I'm personally excited to be with the three women we have today with us. We have Linda Johansson. Now, Linda, I'm going to give a short presentation of you, but please share more when you get a chance to speak. But Linda's been working with sustainability issues over 15 years now. She's in Sweden today, but has been working in South Asia for the last 15 years, in Bangladesh and India, working with H&M on logistics and global management. We have with us Linda Andrén, who is one of SIBC's board members, and also working as Senior VP in Business Development for Gunnebo. Gunnebo, of course, works with security products, safety, and software. Linda Johansson is also SIBC's Senior Sustainability Advisor and brings with her to SIBC her depth of knowledge that we will now get more information about in today's call. Lastly, but not least, we have Sara Larsson with us. Sara is General Manager for the Swedish Chamber of Commerce in India. Now, the Swedish Chamber has over 200 members, Swedish companies as your community. Linda, you've been with the Chamber since 2014. So of course, you bring a host of experiences with you, and you've been in India since demonetization, and of course, the Make in India campaigns, where you've been working with industry to manage the processes of navigation through that. So we're waiting to hear more from you. Before I start the panel discussion, what we see ahead of us is this overarching view of sustainability as a catch-all phrase. We have, of course, massive examples of understanding of the value of sustainability in the industrial context in the last 2 years. A lot of people would say that COVID has put business at a standstill, but actually when it comes to development and the needs for sustainability from an industrial perspective, there have been massive shifts. Of course, right behind us, we have COP26, where every country has put on the table commitments to going net zero. India has committed to going net zero, but has also decided to up its renewable energy commitments by 100%. We have a lot of expectation for solar, for hydro, for wind, but we also have expectations for energy efficiency, and that's where supply chain logistics come into place. Sweden, as part of the EU, has put into place the EU Green Deal in May earlier this year, where $800 billion has been put on the table to make industry more sustainable. The importance of industry and business as a stakeholder has never before been more important. And that's what we want to touch upon today. A lot of us who are reading the papers understand the questions from a policy perspective, which is a little far from our everyday. Today, what we'd like to do is kind of bring this down to operations, to you, me, and how we actually move forward to make these very large commitments and headlines an everyday reality. Now, of course, I sit in Bangalore today, very happy to be here. But Sara, you sit in Delhi, and as I understand, the High Court is currently in discussion about whether schools can open due to air pollution issues. So students are sitting at home, not able to go to school because air pollution is so bad right there, right now. So these issues are no longer abstract. They're every day, they affect us today. And that's what I'd like to discuss for the next 45 minutes. To the audience that's with us, we will have a Q&A format towards the end of the session. Please do feel free though, as we're talking, to put up your Q&A in the chat boxes. And we have team members who will help us navigate those questions when we have time for it. So I'm going to reach out to you one by one to introduce yourselves. You've got 4 minutes. I will lean in when your time is nearing an end, and then we go to questions. I'm going to start with you, Linda Johansson. If you could tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you so much for inviting me to speak in my capacity here as Senior Sustainability Advisor to the SIBC, something that I'm really happy and proud about to be. As mentioned, I currently live and work in Sweden, and I actually work as Sustainability Manager at the Systembolaget, But I've had the great privilege to live and work in Bangladesh and India, as mentioned, also for about 11 years. I started to work in Bangladesh for a small NGO for 2 years, which allowed me to travel to most parts of Bangladesh by local buses and trains, which was a great experience in itself. What I kind of learned from that was that I realized that I wanted to contribute to real change and bigger change. And I then saw the opportunity of addressing change through the workplace. So when an opportunity arose for me to join the H&M group in Bangladesh, actually, I took that chance to move away from the NGO sector to go more into private business. It was quite a hard decision at the time because I thought I should save the world and work for the UN and so on. But looking back and see that I'm still in this space, it is because I really believe that true change can happen through the workplace and through the companies, and that the companies play such a big and important role in sustainability work. And during my time, I worked in H&M. I worked both what's called the production organization, so with the suppliers in Bangladesh, India, Sri Lanka, and to some extent also in Pakistan. I also worked in retail in India, so I was part of setting up the retail organization when H&M opened its first couple of stores. And then I decided after 11 years in South Asia that it was time for me to try out to live and work in Sweden again and see what the sustainability field looks like here. So that's something that I also hope I can share a little bit about here today. So when I moved to Sweden, I joined sustainability, but in logistics. So I would say that my take on sustainability has always been to really be integrated into the business, to see how can we pair sustainability with the business here. And I'm really happy that I've had the experience then to see the different parts of the value chain, because I suspect that the terminology around value chain and supply chain is something that we're going to keep coming back to here again, because it is such an important aspect of successful sustainability work. And also what I've experienced firsthand is really to see how the work has gone from, let's say, compliance to sustainability or charity to sustainability. And I think there will be opportunities also for me to expand a bit more on that later on. But another thing that I also really bring with me as an important learning experience when it comes to sustainability is that it's very important to fall into the trap of what others should do. And I think it's really important for everyone who represents a company to really, put the mirror up in front of yourself and see, what is it that we should do different? What should I do different to improve on sustainability, to accelerate this change? How can we support suppliers? For example, in my roles in H&M, we couldn't just go out and put out lots of demands and requirements. Sometimes we literally had to handhold and actively support. So this whole thing of working together, and that this really is a journey together, I think is one of the key aspects here when it comes to sustainability and the way forward. So you can call it ecosystem, you can call it supply chain, but we are in this together.
I think that's great. I think ecosystem, supply chain, also multi-stakeholder dialogue. Like you say, we've also had a shift in terms of the players that need to be involved in this discussion to make change happen. It's no longer just government or just civil society, it's all of us. And
Absolutely.
That's part of the discussion to have today. Great, thank you so much for that. Linda, Andrén, I come to you from Gunnebo. Very different to what we've just heard from textiles and the supply chain logistics there. From a security, safety, product point of view, please tell us more about your point of view.
Yes, thank you. I'm very happy to be part of this panel, and that we do have the sustainability as one of the topics of SIBC Connects. And I'm representing Gunnebo, and we have a very nice vision to be the leading global provider of a safer world. And with such a vision, for sure, sustainability is high on our agenda. But I do think what I'm missing is the consumer pull. I would like our customers to demand more from us. Comparing a business to consumer and a business to business setting, I do think there are differences in the drivers for change. So I think when you buy a garment, you wear it, you have it on your skin, you wear it and you care about what it's containing, compared to buying a safe for storing your valuables. It's maybe bought by a bank, and then it belongs to the company and not to you personally. And you also use the product for much longer time. So then the sustainability in terms of environmental demands has not been highly ranked in this buying process. And I hope that that will change, because that will also enable us to do the change. But as that drive has not really been there, I actually also think that legal demands, legislations, I kind of embrace them because they support us in doing the change. And also when money talks, when financial money, like pension funds, when they move into more sustainable solutions or investments, that's also driving a change. And I think we need this push to make this huge step for humankind. And I do think the first step that you take is the most important. And I like what Linda said, we need to go from charity, we need to go from risk and compliance, and to really embrace it into our business, into our offer. And just one personal example from me, I think it's important also that we as leaders walk the talk. So when planning a business trip during November, I actually took a train instead of a flight, even though it was from Sweden to Germany. It was a rather long journey. I wanted to try it out to see if it was possible. And I were able to take the train one way, but going back, I had to take the flight because it was not possible to find the solution. And I think that's an illustrative example of how it is. You will make small progresses, and sometimes you will have difficulties to find the solution. But I see it as 50% improvement that I could take the train one way. So that's what I try to embrace, like do the change, go from talking to walking.
Absolutely. I think walk the talk is going to become a hashtag for SIBC sustainability dialogues, because it's not enough to put onus on, of course, again, business or government. We also have to actually take the little bit of change that's required to change our behaviors. And I do think, and we chatted about this, Linda, before the panel discussion, we were talking about looking at a lot of Instagram posts and social media around Glasgow, and the real difficulty to actually reach Glasgow, the biggest dialogue of sustainability this year, sustainably, because it was so difficult to take planes, trains, and automobiles to get there. And that has to change if we're actually going to be able to walk the talk ourselves. But thank you. With that, I come to Sara. Sara, from a chamber perspective, with your eyes and ears on the ground, tell us, where do you stand on this?
Thank you, Ati, and great to hear both Linda and your very clear perspectives and clear, I would say, commitment to sustainability as well. Well, just shortly about me and my background. I mean, I came to India 18 years back, as it is now, working also within corporate, and maybe I did a little similar tour as Linda. I came out of, but I started in the corporate. That's how I ended up in India, and then I left that and have been working more with social sustainability rather than environment for a number of years. And since 2014, as you were mentioning, Arti, I'm responsible for the Swedish Chamber of Commerce in India. I think my interest and my key is that I believe in community. Linda Johansson was saying we do this together, and I think that's so true. And we need the whole thing of driving to come to a place of both shared values and shared passions for what we see needs to change and improve in the world, because we do on a global scale. It's so important. That's where I find my energy lies in, to drive things together. And I feel that, I mean, sustainability has been on the agenda for a number of years. And as you mentioned, Arti, there are a number of things in India that right now, the air pollution, for example, that is hitting us. And that has personally put me on an edge, saying, if you can't breathe the air where you live, what do you do then? And it's very troubling to have that reality. And a lot of efforts are being put into now to reduce the pollution, which we are grateful for. And we hope it will be improved in the days to come. But when it comes to sustainability, I feel, or some things that I'm thinking of in there is, one thing is the use of words. The whole thing when we speak about a subject, after a while the words get used, and we lose sometimes the value of it. And I think that's a key and important thing for us to keep the value of the word, saying what does it mean to really work for environment change. It's not a buzzword. It's actually it's a question about the future, and all this to not lose track of when it becomes something that everyone does, but to really hold on to the core of what we want to see change. And I think for me, another part that is very important which is such a challenge, is to look at the presence of the future, if that makes sense. It's easy that we often start from what we have and we try to improve that, which is important, and change that. But we also need an element of looking at what the future should be and bring that into the present, detached from what we have at our hand right now, because I think that's when we reimagine our world. That's when we reimagine what's happening around us, and new solutions are coming into place. So that's some of my thoughts on it. Thank you.
That's great. And I think everyone's touched upon things we would like to expand on during the course of this discussion. And really important, because there needs to be no silo thinking. There needs to be a collective discussion how to move forward together from all perspectives. And I think the three speakers we have with us today really represent a very broad range of kind of consensus around how this can happen. But Linda, Johansson, I want to start with you, because you touched upon the work that you've done, of course, with supply chains and the capacity building that you worked on in your role with H&M. But you also made a really interesting point that I thought we could expand on with your work in India over the time, and Bangladesh, but potentially, on the move from charity to sustainability. And even within that, how sustainability has shifted perhaps in people's understanding and operations of that. Could you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I see really a big shift and a big change there. I mean, I remember in the beginning when I used to meet suppliers, both in Bangladesh and India, they were always very happy to talk about the charity work they did, how they were supporting schools and hospitals and so on, which is of course fantastic. That's great, but that's not what I wanted to hear. So sometimes I probably came across as a bit rude and then kind of brushed them off and said, okay, but let's move into what are you doing? What are you doing in your factory? What are you doing in your business? Directly linked to your business. And I mean, also when the CSR Act was initially rolled out in India, then you were not even allowed to take that money into your supply chain. It had to be separated from it, because in H&M at the time, we got super excited and we had all of these ideas, but they were just at the border of our supply chain. And then the lawyer said, no, you can't do that. I believe that has changed. So I think that's also a really important change and a signal also from the government of India then to make this change and see that, no, the investments here, what we should work on is really, if you want to have big impact, is in your own supply chain. Then you can, of course, support that school or orphanage or whatever, but that's not where we're going to achieve the big shifts. And the big shift then within sustainability that I see, that is when it comes to ownership and drive. When companies start setting their own targets, have their own ambitions, and are not just being told by others what to do. In the garments and textiles business, you have the classical example of auditors coming from all the different big brands. Someone is telling the factory to put the fire extinguisher on that wall and someone else on that wall. That's what I was told repeatedly when I got into this industry, to today to see how a lot of, especially in India, the big garment manufacturers have really taken ownership. They have own ambitions. They go themselves to the big meetings, not because they were dragged there by one of their buyers, but because they want to, because they see that this also creates business for them. And also to see how sustainability is a space of collaboration and not competition. I have throughout my career, even now in Sweden, working now with alcoholic beverages, as well as in H&M, collaborated with our biggest competitors. It was natural to me to speak to Inditex, Nike, Walmart, CNA, everyone that when we were looking at sort of business side of things were our main competitors. Those were the ones that I would speak to the most, because we would share the same challenges and we could also then find the solutions together, which has always been a very exciting part of that. So I mean, there's no coincidence that collaboration is also one of the key elements of the SDGs. That's how we have to reach there.
Exactly. No, I think so. In terms of looking at textiles, of course, H&M, to be fair, is a front runner in this regard, in terms of the work you were doing even 10, 15 years ago to create value chains, supply chains that were future looking and forward looking and safe. At my time at CEDA, we were involved in some of those processes, working with supply chains and capacity building. But then Linda and Andrén also touched upon a really important point. Textiles here and now. I'm consumer conscious. I want to wear something that I feel comfortable putting on my body, that I am able to sleep at night knowing that there's nothing I'm doing to me or my family that will hurt us. When it comes to moving away from consumer contact a little bit more, like Gunnebo's products, that concept of sustainability has to take on a different dimension. For Gunnebo, that has to mean taking in different points of view, R&D, product development. How do you work with sustainability and how do you see this shift taking place?
I do think like when it comes to safety products, for sure they need to be compliant with the different gradings and to be really secure. And they are also made to with the material really to stick together. So it's rather hard to design for recycling, to take the material apart, because that's kind of what you should not be able to do. So doing this and to also fulfill then all certification levels of the different security levels, depending on the value to be protected, it takes time. And we are also dependent on our value chain and on the availability of different materials. So I do agree with Linda J. We are going to meet the same challenges as our competitors when it comes to find sustainable steel, sustainable concrete. These materials, we need to have new materials that are more sustainable, but we also need to know how they react and work within our products to maintain the security level. So it's, I think it's a collaborative effort that is needed going forward.
But just a quick follow-up to that, it's also important that consumers like us are aware of the time that it takes and that we are not looking to have the same kind of new solutions on the table overnight. And that communication has to be part of the process of transparency in knowing what to expect and how to meet these SDGs. And this, of course, very ambitious 1.5 that we now have ahead of us. That's great. Thank you so much, Linda. And Sara, now you've heard from industry. You've heard from industry sitting in Sweden. And of course, now you've been working with industry in India and having these discussions firsthand to say how to navigate them, how to enable them, how to facilitate moving forward. We'd love to hear more from you.
Thank you, Arti. Yes, of course, it is very high on the agenda. And you mentioned some of the also actions that have been taken from the Indian government statements in the last COP26. But I have to say that, we see that from all, since I work with the Swedish companies in India, a very focus on this. So what we wanted to do, what we did, we wanted to understand a little bit more what companies are doing on a general level. And we did, together with the Consulate General in Mumbai, we initiated a sustainability mapping last year with the purpose of looking at what companies were actively or practically doing when it comes to operations, supply chain, engagement with customers, engagement with suppliers, with the employees as well, and what they were doing in their own facilities, offices, production plants, and so forth. So we launched this study in Maharashtra and Gujarat on the west coast, and we had 18 companies participating in a quite extensive survey and interview schedule. And beyond knowing the practical steps they're working with, we also wanted to see if we could identify challenges and opportunities for collaborative work. For example, if you're located in the same geographical area, is there something there that you can do together when it comes to, for example, to water conservation or biodiversity and so forth, or waste? And we also wanted to lay the foundation for a platform to work together by highlighting what companies were doing. It's a good way to show others what is happening, the best practices, the good examples are there. And trust me, there's a lot of good examples coming in the group. And we also wanted to kind of, with this mapping, create a bit of a baseline to say, where are we today? How much renewable energy are we producing? How much waste are we taking care of? How much water are we reusing, and so forth? To have a little bit of a baseline that we can measure against and use in as we go forward as setting goals towards. So this was a really interesting study, and it's generated a lot of interest. Actually, we just launched our little booklet on this as well. I can send you the PDF later on if you want to see. And it contains a lot of information about what the companies are doing. But areas that came up that we see that there are also possibilities to collaborate further on are things like waste management, circularity, where we also need to create and find chains, the whole value chains and suppliers and so forth, to be able to close the loop properly. Supplier engagement. How do we work and develop suppliers as well in the supply chain that are on the journey on the green transition? Water conservation, cleaning and reuse water, and of course green energy commitment. But one also topic that companies really want to collaborate on is employee and family engagement, because the saying is not just what we do with in our operations, but actually, and the most important asset resource is our people, and they've taken a lot of steps to also engage with them and their families on sustainability. So those are some things that we are doing in India right now.
Yeah, that's great, and we would love to share, of course, the work that the Chamber has done with the booklet, and of course the work that's going to take place in the future on how to operationalize this. In some of the conferences we've held over the last 2 weeks, what's come out over and over again is the importance of safety in terms of the employee, and the importance of safety being not just my personal physical safety, my psychological safety, but my also concerns for my family. And when these are taken care of, everyone's working the best that they can, their potential and their actual expectations. So it makes so much sense that after COVID, this is coming out as a key area for attention in the future. But another issue that comes clearly when you what the Chamber is doing and the industry feedback is the need to align incentives. Because of course, if you're looking at suppliers, you're looking at consumers and producers, in order to make this happen, incentives have to align across the value chain. So what is the value, of course, for sub-suppliers to actually comply or to own, as Linda talked about, and what are the results they could expect? And so Linda, I'm going to turn to you, Linda Johansson, to ask you, in the work that you did and have done in South Asia and continue to do now in Sweden, what do you feel suppliers can look forward to in terms of incentives to kind of motivate them to actually take part in this discussion?
Yeah, I think one aspect is, of course, sort of the customer aspect of this, and what do the end customers want, that Linda Andrén also has been talking a bit about. And I think all customer surveys show that people are aware, especially consumers in Sweden, have a very high awareness of sustainability. Then if they want to pay more for it, that's a different story and probably another sort of webinar to have. But more directly also for the suppliers, of course, I've seen it firsthand, especially in my experience with H&M. I can give you one very concrete example. When H&M now quite a few years ago decided to expand on the H&M home product line, which then meant going not just using textiles, but also hard goods. So completely different new types of materials. And I think that first we thought that, well, we can just go and use IKEA suppliers, but then IKEA suppliers were not interested with the small volumes that were at the time when this new product range was launched. So we had to go out and find new suppliers who were not at all on a compliance level that we wanted, which meant that me and my team, we had to really handhold them. We had to spend time with them. We had to spend days and weeks and sometimes months to support them in this work. I mean, we used to joke around that, we were giving them free consultancy and business. Otherwise, they would have to go out in the market and hire quite expensive consultants. But that was just the way of working, that we saw that requirements and demands is not enough. We have to also very practically support this work. And of course, I was then very proud that, after a couple of months or perhaps a year, to go into an H&M store or to look on H&M in the online space and just see all of these products that then came out to customers that were made in India, and then know the whole journey behind that when we started to work with some of these suppliers, they were by no standards ready for export according to sort of the lowest level of compliance. We were not even talking sustainability at the time. And then to see how they, with the business and with the support, can grow. And I think that's a really important aspect here, to take your responsibility also when you put in demands and requirements, that, okay, but what support do you also offer? And I think that also goes hand in hand with a big shift internally that I can see has happened in a lot of companies, that my first couple of years, I had to spend so much time when it came to sustainability to convince people internally. Even though I had my role, the top management had put me there, I had a very clear sort of mandate, but there were people around me who had not bought into the concept. So a lot of work then was around change management, and that I feel I don't have to do at all today. Everyone buys in, everyone knows why we need to do it, and they more say, okay, but you need to support me, you need to help me. How can I take the right decisions when I buy this new product or this wine or whatever? What should I think about? How can I do this in a better way? So that's a huge shift, and I think also that then also trickles down, and sort of suppliers see that change, that as their customers are sort of behaving also in a better way, together with them creating better market access for them.
Yeah, I think the example you use is so clear in terms of how small steps in supporting your suppliers can create market expansion very realistically and very kind of tangibly. But you also touch upon the different drivers that cause this change. And of course, H&M has taken on, in your time there, a decision internally to fundamentally work with this process that you also touch upon can take time and money. Finance is a driver, without a doubt. Finance and where it's coming from, the push and pull factors, will help move this change perhaps a little bit faster, or at least contribute to moving the discussion forward. We have a lot of discussion on finance at a very high level. We have the EU Green Deal coming out in May. We have, of course, the commitments made by different countries during COP26. But how do you operationalize this, and what does it mean for companies like the ones today that we're sitting with, in Linda, for example, yourself and Gunnebo? Now, you've touched upon finance in your introduction as well, and of course, have a focus on the way in which finance can actually contribute to change. What do you think about the different drivers that finance can actually catalyze and enable?
Well, I do think it's about embracing it from a customer's perspective as well, that it should be integrated in your offer to your customer. And I do think sustainability is such a broad concept, and it can feel a bit overwhelming. There are so many KPIs into this area, so you don't know where to start. But I do think with the stakeholder analysis and materiality analysis and all that you start also to know what it is that you can offer your customers. And then going from just having it as a cost or legal compliant to really think, what is it that we then can offer to our customers? And I do think it's important to integrate it to the whole business, not only have one role appointed. I think it should be all of us, and it should be in our DNA, and kind of unleash the power of the employees, because I think there are so much energy around this topic from like a personal view and engagement that we should utilize in creating a great improvement vehicle internally. So that's what I think.
Thank you very much. No, it's interesting. It's the point that you raised, because of course, if I come back to my time at CEDA as well, when we were, and of course, sitting with 4 women is empowering in itself. When we were working on projects on the ground, one of the check boxes we had to make sure we were addressing in a very substantive way was gender balance in the work that we did. And now we don't need to do that as much. There is no question, of course, there's still work to be done, but it's not something to be mainstreamed as much as it was 15 years ago, because we highlighted it again, again, and again. I'd actually like to ask, before I come to Sara, Linda Johansson, do you think sustainability as a department should be mainstreamed?
Oh, that's the kind of the $1 million question. I think it's a process, it's a journey. I don't think you can start there, because it will be lost. And also I think it's important to keep 2 thoughts at the same time here. You do need some sustainability people who are the experts, the same as you would have in any other field, who are, forward-looking, who are 5-10 years ahead. But then for the more sort of day-to-day work and operationalize the work, then I think the sustainability people should sit in the business team. And then if their role is called sustainability something or not, that I think is debatable. Then it's more about the mandate. But my experience, and I mean, that's also been sort of my personal journey, has been that I didn't want to work in a sustainability department, because I wanted to get, dirt under my fingernails and dig in and sit with the business people. So, for example, when I started to work with logistics, I knew nothing about logistics, and all of a sudden I was in an environment with logistics professional. I mean, you have a university degree in logistics. And I was trying then to support them with sustainability. So of course I had to spend a lot of time just learning and understanding. And similarly now I'm in a new role in a completely new field, where I again have to learn sort of the basics of the business to be able to do a successful sustainability work. So I think you need both, and it also depends on where the company is in the journey. I can hear now from some of the fashion companies, they are all, you know, making their sustainability departments much smaller and more integrating it. But if you're starting completely fresh, well, then maybe you need more of dedicated resources.
That makes sense. You have kind of a development pathway that you take, and you reorganize depending where you are on that pathway. But of course, a lot of this is done through communication, through sharing, through enablement, and you need actors to help companies find a balance, to start at a baseline together and also understand how to move forward together. And of course, the Chamber is one of these business enablers. And of course, you're working now with 200 companies there in India who face similar challenges, but also specific challenges in terms of what they do and where they come from. And of course, it runs the gamut from manufacturing and industry to service companies. And so they have with them unique challenges as well within geographic concept. How will you take forward the sustainability work that you've started?
Well, let me first correct you. Sorry, Arti. We do. The Chamber has about 110 members, so we don't necessarily. We
Soon
have
to be 200.
Yeah, we have 200 Swedish companies in India. We do try to work with all anyway, but I just wanted to put the numbers right, so we have that correct. Yeah, we are taking, first thing what we're doing is we're now taking forward the sustainability mapping from Maharashtra and Gujarat to actually do it with other Swedish companies in the rest of India. So right now that's happening together with the embassy. We have another 35 companies that are being mapped out that we will add on to this. But what we see and what we will do is that it will be a lot of course, local collaboration, because that's important. That's where you can find the synergies. At the same time, you want to have access to what's happening on a national level. So we will create and have both levels. We actually met yesterday in SKF for one of our first best practice sharing sessions. With a lot of companies then from, this was in Pune, with a lot of companies joining in and frantically taking notes as we went through the operations and looked at waste management and energy efficiency measures being taken. And I think Linda, Andrén, you also, both of you, Linda, as I mentioned, talked about people's engagement. And I think that was so evident to see, because so many of the efficiency measures being taken and brought forward is actually from the people working on the lines themselves, from the assembly, from the operation lines. And they are the ones coming with the suggestion, bringing efficiency into the existing flow. And what was also interesting to hear, and what I know also other companies are doing, is the cascading of that improvement. So you go back to your OEMs, you go back to your suppliers and say, actually, we found this efficiency possibility on your machine, you know, and then that changes the design, it changes the specs for the suppliers' machines for others. So it's that kind of dynamic and organic learning that is also happening and sharing that I think is very important. And I heard, as we were talking yesterday, and I've heard that before as well, collaborations happening between also companies, already the Swedish companies and other companies as well, that are located and are working, maybe located geographically in the same place, or just part of one another's supply chains and value chains. And so what we, you know, the companies themselves are doing amazing work and are working with this as well, you know, in a very integrated way, I would say now as well throughout their organization. But what we really want to try to do is to highlight and speak of the good examples, lift best practices, making sure that there is a clear learning possibility, that you can draw upon experiences already been made, and also infuse maybe the possibility of new and innovative solutions into the flow by linking up to innovative startups from Sweden, from other places that are doing interesting work in sustainability that could be of use for these companies as well. We are also discussing on a policy level. So we've had a workshop with the Maharashtra Environmental Ministry or Minister just recently, and where he is very keen on the mapping that we have done, that is actually being done by other company groups as well. So let's see how we can create a movement that is already going on, but just add to it and highlight what companies are doing and working together to see this take, you know, cascade is what I would like to use. Yeah.
And having that perspective where you can plug into the different stakeholders is also critical here, because you're a unifying force in that sense, because there's so much work happening. It has to come together to really reach scale, and enablers can make this happen, like the chamber. And I mean, what's interesting, you touch upon kind of the best practice sharing, because of course, the CEO roundtable that SIBC works with has a digitization working group. And last week, we actually launched a handbook, of course, also developed in Pune, the hub, with different companies working together to realize how can we actually share, and how can we actually, you know, as we say, dare to share, and also borrow with ease, so we can actually learn from one another without being competition to one another. And of course, this is now within the ISPLIT group, but we'll now move further out from the ISPLIT group. And that's actually maybe the practice of engagement we need to see cross-fertilize across sectors, sustainability being a primary motivator across these discussions. We have 2 questions now from the audience that I'll take before I continue. And I'm going to open this up to the panel, so anyone who feels like they want to answer, jump in. So first question is from an anonymous attendee. Great to see 4 women on the panel. More power to you. Great to hear all your insights and the work that you do. My question is, how do you measure progress on sustainability? I'm going to give you all the questions, and then we can take them one by one. So we've got one from Mizur Khan saying, thank you, SIBC. You're welcome, for organizing such a wonderful event. This is one of the very important areas that are missing within the SME context. How do we work in developing funds for SMEs that give them the chance to pay reasonable prices for their investments for the future? Okay, and the last one, Sanjeev Sharma. Thank you for a very good dialogue on sustainability. One of the bigger challenges for suppliers in the short term is increased cost for adopting new materials, especially the case for reusable water and cost of treatment. How are the suppliers motivated to or incentivized to handle this? 4 very different questions. I'm going to start with the first one. Progress on measuring sustainability. Any takers?
I can start if try. Yeah, some aspects are of course easier and some are more challenging to measure. In the social space, it's typically quite hard to measure, unfortunately. I mean, you can of course measure sort of the hard values in the sense that do all employees have contracts, are they paid properly, follow up sort of more from an audit system perspective. But if we have a goal of, you know, improving people's livelihood or those kind of more overarching, and do we contribute to fair and equal employment, that can be more challenging to measure. But you have to kind of find your ways around that. When it comes to climate area, I mean, CO2 is the most sort of commonly used way of measuring things. So I've experienced that both from energy consumption, and of course it's a big KPI when it comes to transportation and also warehousing. So that was how we used it. But CO2 is also still a very tricky way to measure, because even I don't know, is 100 CO2, is that good or bad? I don't know. We still need to relate it to something. So I have throughout my year spent a lot of time together with sort of controllers and people with more analytical skills to try to say, okay, how do we make this relevant? How do we relate this to something else that we can understand? We're so good at measuring cost per piece or whatever it may be, or efficiency levels, but we have to find sort of the KPIs and ways to measure sustainability that make sense to that organization.
Just to follow up on that before anyone else.
All solution, I suppose.
Exactly, and the question of KPIs and the examples you give are very kind of hard, concrete, tangible facts. And of course, sustainability is so intangible in some cases. The measurement is such a tricky discussion, always has been. And I think that's actually something to put on the table for what needs to be worked on, is actually creating the matrix and the metrics to actually take this forward, where all change is captured, however small or large, because the large ones, very easy to measure relatively, and also understand, but there's so much more that we might be missing that we need to figure out a way to actually also incorporate. So that's something that maybe is not an easy answer for, but from this discussion, something we as SIBC, of course, take on to discuss further again, and maybe another discussion.
May I add as well?
Absolutely.
I think also the boundaries, what is it that we measure and what is the boundaries of it? So is it only your own factory, or is it a supply chain? And then as soon as you start to include more in the supply chain, then it gets even harder to measure. So I do think like life cycle analysis and these type of tools are good tools to use in complement to the KPIs that you use to kind of box in also the supply chain aspect.
Yeah, and of course also, I mean, all the reporting tools that are out there and sort of reporting standards are of course also an important sort of tool to look at, because I think that's one of the biggest challenges here, like you said, with the boundaries, that it's very easy that companies start kind of making up their own, and then it becomes impossible to compare even if you're in the industry. So then to put a lot of expectations on customers to take the right decision based on different types of products, I mean, to me that's not realistic, because it's too hard to understand and digest these kind of ways. So yeah.
Interoperability for the consumer point of view is really critical. But also, I mean, one of the things you say, life cycle analysis, that's so important from a company perspective and taking a value-based decision how to actually produce. But that also then puts you in a competitive potential disadvantage depending on which market you want to engage with. And that balance also has to be found. And that's something, of course, where there's work to be done. Sarah, did you want to say anything on this?
Well, I'm just thinking in my context and what we are attempt to do with creating a baseline, which of course is a trick to do, so say how much and measure against that. And I think it's important as well where you start where you're at and you measure your improvements. As you say, you can't necessarily compare yourself. You can have that as a target, and you can have as a goal, but your own improvements, and that's what we try to do with this baseline, then to say how are you improving on time your company, and then of course there will be healthy competition between the companies who is doing more. So I think that's also good use on a higher level of how we were going to put it together.
And set that kind of the competition, but also best practice and how to get from one stage to the next, because that's so important for companies to see, okay, they're very similar to us, we can do this too. And to create that kind of help and capacity building.
And I think if I could just add on here, I think it's beautiful when companies from different sectors work together. So if you have IKEA, you have the H&M, and then you put them against the Gunnebo, or the, not against, but together with Gunnebo, Atlas Copco, SKF, it comes from a very different sector, but just the cross learnings that are there. Because for example, when it comes to code of conduct, the textile industry have gone very far in terms of people engagement, I would say. Maybe on the industrial side, it's more on quality and safety and environment, but there's possibilities to learn in between, which is also beautiful. I think is powerful.
I think that, of course, having the mapping, evidence-based kind of action is so important as well, because communication here is critical. Because as Linda's touched upon, we need to know, be it from a production point of view or a consumption point of view, and how do we absorb and digest these numbers in an easy to use fashion, really critical. Now, there is a question on financing for SMEs and of course investments for new technologies when it comes to water treatment and recycling. I'm not sure if that's a question that anyone has comments on here, but of course we would like to know, of course, from SIBC's perspective, we have these big budgets that have been put on the table at a very international level, country to country, where commitments are being made. It's going to be really interesting from our perspective also to see how this plays out in the next 6 months, the next year, how these budgets are being utilized and how they are reaching SMEs in this case, from the questions Sanjeev and Mizano are asking, and how new technologies can be capitalized to answer the questions, Sarah, you touched upon the industry is facing on the ground, that are very basic everyday questions, but need solutions and need technology and innovation to actually come to answer them. And how do we create these opportunities? So if there are any comments on that, I'll take those right now, or we can continue discussions. One thing I wanted to ask each one of us, and of course, we have, and in the discussions in the introductions you've all given, this is not just a professional position that you're taking, it's actually very personal. We talked about walking the talk. And if we look at the ambition we've set, depending on who you are, 2030, 2050, 2060, 2070, we cannot do this alone or in silos. It has to be business, it has to be government, it has to be civil society, it has to be academia, and it has to be us. So I'd like to ask each one of you, starting with Sarah, actually, what do you want to see happen in the next 10 years in a very use case perspective, to lift it, bring it down from the ambition? What would you like to see?
Well, I think when it comes to change of this, what we're talking about here, I have to look at myself as well. Because if I'm not ready to change and change the way I do, then I cannot expect big companies or someone else to take the responsibility for it as well. So personally, from a personal perspective, which I think is going to be, which is a challenge, is how do you kind of change your own life to be more environmentally sustainable? How much do I travel? What do I use? How do I reuse? How do I work with circularity in my own space? And I think that's where it kind of starts, actually, because someone was saying to walk the talk. Yeah, that's for me personally as well. If I want someone else to change, I better have integrity in my own choices.
Thank you very much. I mean, exactly, walk the talk. Linda Johansson, over to you.
Well, what I see as one of the important things here to really get the big change. I mean, I do agree, of course, with, you know, small steps and you know, your personal decisions and so on. But I can also sort of be the devil's advocate here and say, I want to continue to fly. I love India. I want to be able to go back to India at least once a year. So airlines fix it for me. So what I'm looking for here is that how can we get pilots, because there's a lot of good pilots out there, but to get into scale. Because I feel like that's one of the things that most industries struggle with today. There's lots of great ideas, lots of really exciting pilots, but how do we get it into scale? To me, that's what really needs to happen in the next sort of 10 years to be able to reach the goals we have set up for 2040 and beyond.
I think that's great. When you said pilots initially and talked about flights, I was a little bit confused. So now I understand. But I'm actually going to come to Linda and Andrén about that, because you've touched upon, of course, what you're already doing in terms of the flights that you're taking or the trains you're taking. But if we listen to Linda Johansson saying, I'm a consumer, allow me to buy a solution that actually gives me the results I want, and I am the push factor. How do we address that?
Well, I do think it's one thing that with I want to fly, I think it's like, we cannot make this a blame game or just too hard to reach. So I think I tried to be transparent. I took train one way and I flew back because that was the only solution. And personally, I'm trying to be transparent with what I do. So sometimes I will fail. That's also part of the learning journey, and not to make it like to be a role model that is unreachable, because we all need to do what we can do. And so that I do think is kind of one part of it. Then from an industry setting, I do think that we need to include scope 3 in our products. We need to have to take the full picture into account. And I really hope that consumer behavior will change, and that we will have the customers asking for sustainable solution. So that, because not only the small companies struggle with investments questions, to really find the new materials and things, it's costly also for the middle-sized companies and the large companies. So we need to work together in this, and I think a lot of good has been said into the collaboration, and I do think cross-industry learnings is as well one of the things that I really would like to see.
I think that's great, and of course from Gunnebo's perspective, this is something that you're working with and are internalizing. Is there anything you want to say more about what Gunnebo is doing specifically in this area?
We are working for sure, as I think Linda said it before, like in the code of conduct in the supply chain, we are an industry. So yes, we have had health and safety very high on our agenda and on our KPI sheet. But now I do think we will start to move forward, also including more into our product offering into the future. But it will take time and take effort.
Of course, what's important there is the communication. And of course, you've got the chamber doing that, SIBC, and a number of business enablers that are working with industry and with our triple helix, quadruple helix partners to share, because lifting visibility and giving credit where it's due is also critical to moving this forward and keep the momentum going, and the incentive to take part in this. Now, of course, we have ISPLIT, we have CITES, we have SciTech, these different constellations of actors that need to also cross-fertilize, because there's discussions that need to happen across these different boundaries, as you say, to get the best solutions. And of course, Sara, the work that you're doing with sustainability, inspiring, and we'd love to hear more about that as it continues in the future. Now I see that you're typing an answer to Aditya Sharma, who is introducing himself both in energy to the chamber, which is great. And Athika Chono was the anonymous question earlier, as the panelists can see. Athika works with Green Karmas based in Sweden and in India, and has been a very long part of the Sweden-India corridor community. I think with that, I'm going to ask for final words from all of you, and then we come to a close of today's sustainability dialogue. And we hope this is one of many that we will have at SIBC with our partners to take forward some of the critical questions industry is facing, consumers, as well as different technology players on the supply and value chain. Final words, Sarah, I'm going to start with you.
Sorry, I was multitasking and chatting with or texting to Aditya as it was. No, I would, final words would just be thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to be part of this conversation, and think it's really interesting, and I really appreciate the perspectives of both the Lindas here. And I know that I have so much to learn still within sustainability, and especially in the environmental space, but I'm excited about what we are doing and the energy I see in the group of companies and the collaboration we can find amongst with SIBC and amongst companies and with different agencies in India as well as the subject develops. So I just want to say thank you. That would be my final words.
And thank you from SIBC very much for being here and sharing what you're doing. Linda and Andrén, I'll come to you.
Well, my favorite expression is to start walk the talk, and to do communication internally as well, to unleash the power and to get the people engaged and supportive. I do think that the best ideas come from many different levels of the company, like Sara said, from the efficiency proposals. So we need to engage those that know the part of the business best. And thank you for arranging this. And I hope this is just the starting point of a series of talks.
Well, with that, I'm going to ask Linda Johansson, as SIB Sustainability Advisor. Linda, where do we go from here?
That's a really good question. I mean, I was going to again thank you for this opportunity, and also an opportunity for me then to more in person introduce myself to the community. And I hope that there will be lots more collaborations and connections in this space going forward. I mean, we could of course have a quite interesting chat about that. Why is it only now that it's the first sort of session specifically around sustainability? But let's not read too much into that. We're here now, and it's been a great chat. Yeah, to all members, please reach out. I'm very happy to sort of speak one-on-one and support to the extent I can, but also of course hoping that from SIBC's side that we also come together and create more of these kind of forums to interact and share experiences. It's been great today. Thank you.
Thank you all very much for making the time, and hopefully we come back together in the near future to take forward some of the critical questions that have been asked today: measuring, impact assessment, how to create tangible outcomes of intangible inputs, and how do we actually make this change together. Thank you for everyone who joined us online, and we hope to have you back again with us soon at SIBC. Please check our website, www.sibc.se, for more information on what's happening on our event calendar. And with that, I'll say namaste from Bangalore.